Sing a hymn that's unusual. I don't know if we'd sang hymn number 1 before, but appreciated that hymn. Thy throne eternal ages stood, ere seas or stars were made. How many today believe that his throne is not yet? They say it's still yet to be. Thou art the ever-living God, where all the nations dead. You know what? If you would take eternity and think about eternity, it would be possible to put eternity on a yardstick, and you can't, because it has no beginning or no end. And if you would take time and be able to put time on that yardstick, let's say you take a 3-foot yardstick and say, well, that's eternity, and I realize I'm using human terms. Well, we know eternity has no bounds. If you would take a 3-foot yardstick and you would put time on it, it would be a dot on that yardstick, so small you could barely see it. That's how big time would be. Someone said yesterday we're digging some bones up in California, and said they've been there at least 30,000 years. They did it once. They dug up some bones and said, oh, so these are 1 million years old. Said large animals that roam. Come to find out, it was a circus train that went through about 30 years before an elephant died, and they took it off and buried it beside the railroad track, and it was an elephant been dead 30 years. They said it'd been laying there 1 million years. Let's remember those that's not here today. Our people walk through afflictions no others walk through. Our life is different. The Lord makes it so. Let me just, before I begin to take a text, let me just read you a passage. And didn't read what it says. In Isaiah 33, there's a passage. I want you to notice what it says. In verse 14, in the bottom part of that verse, last half of that verse, it says, Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burdens? I expect an Armenian preacher would preach as a soul that would go into the regions of the damned. They probably would. But it says, Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? But a devouring fire is God, the devouring fire, and He devours our flesh, and fleshly thoughts, and fleshly doctrines, false imaginations. But then it says, who among us shall dwell with everlasting groanings? So, well, surely that's a sinner. Surely that's someone lost and gone to hell. But this is what the next verse says. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly. He that despises the gain of oppressions, to shake the hands from holding of bribes, stops his ears from hearing of blood, he shuts his eyes from seeing evil. He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munition of rocks. Bread shall be given him. His water shall be sure. Thine eyes shall see the King in his beauty. They shall behold the land that is very far off. So who is it? Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? You did just this week. You didn't think that would ever happen. You know why? Who among us shall dwell with the everlasting and walk with the devouring fire? Not you personally. It's what the Lord has made you to believe. And you can't help it. You're not free will in that. You'd be the last that somebody would ever tell me. That somebody would come and tell me that you switched over and believed in free will. You'd be the last for me to ever believe that. You remember. You remember. Be thankful. The Lord's put you where He has. It's not the natural IQ, Ken. It's not that. I think back to Pittsburgh years ago. When that little fellow would slip in on the back seat and sit down. He had more than all of the rest of them put together. That's the way it is. Lead us in prayer, Ken, and pray for those that are not here, and pray for the service.
Almighty God, our Father, humble head and bow, we come before you under thy grace this Lord's day. Thank you once again, Father, to be here. Be pleasure and pleasure of thy holy hand. Lord, Father, there's nothing in us that would cause us to make us ever see thy truth. In your infinite grace and mercy, you saw fit to draw us out of this sin, Lord. Place us in the presence of our dear Son. Can't thank you enough, Father, that you did this. You plucked us and branded us apart. Truly, Father, thou art a great and wonderful God that would do that to such a feeble and unworthy one such as we are. Thank you, Father, for all blessings you give us. Know, Father, all things do come to thee. Sometimes we're afflicted with various problems and difficulties. We know, Father, for various reasons you've done that. You've made us to walk this path. Made us to see, Father, various things that we never did see before. We pray for you to be with those who are not with us this day. Give us reason. Once again, Father, if you will. Pray to lead, guide, and direct us, Father. You normally are here. Our brother and sister, family in Ohio, our brother up in North Dakota, 2 sisters down in Virginia. Pray for you to lead, guide, and direct them this day. Yes, pray for you to be a thing of those among us who are sick and afflicted for various things. Be with their family members who are sick and afflicted with good. Lead, guide, and direct them. Give all children the right faith in the this world for our group. You, Father, in number. So that we guide and direct. We know you add to it. So it should be added. No going out and passing out trash. We know we don't go out and have programs. Really God, a better thing, you do all the saving, you do all the faith. So thank you, Father, for these things. Give our pastor, he brings bread of life to us, and give him the word this day to love and thank you. Thank you, God, for
Turn to Matthew 10 for a while. Before Matthew 5, and Matthew 5 is when Jesus declared what's called the Sermon on the Mount, and I believe it was there he was setting forth the new era that was to come, when he was showing that it was from the inside that man sinned, not externally. Before that time he had chosen some disciples, and he called them apostles. You find the recording of it in the book of Luke, and would remind you of a passage that when he talks here in this first verse, he called his 12 disciples to him. And I want to call to your mind a verse in 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 28. I want this verse to be embedded in your mind and to know what it means. And I think this may not sound like much to you today, to some of you. Most of you know what it is, but I just want to refresh your mind. And again, thank him for his blessings and his goodness to us that he's permitted and allowed us to see. Because if we have eyes to see and ears to hear, because he's made it so. It says in the 12th chapter, 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 28, it says, in God, it didn't say, would you join the church? It didn't say, would you like to join? It doesn't say that, does it? It doesn't say join the church of your choice. It doesn't say that. It said God hath set. God hath set. And that's an action of God. Some in the church. And the first were the apostles. And then it goes on to say what else? All the gifts that are there, all the other things that there might be. So he said God has set some in the church, first apostles. And be mindful when he took the Lord's Supper, that it was with the 12, that he took it there in that upper room, and as they observed the Passover, I believe Judas left at that time, and be mindful that he looked at Judas, and he said, that thou doest, do quickly. Do it now. In other words, what Judas was going to do was predestinated to be done. The Lord said, I have not chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil. The Lord knew what he was going to do, but Judas could not do it until the Lord dismissed him from the meeting. He said, that thou doest, do it now. And then I believe the supper was observed. And it was observed with the church, and the church only at that time, and no more. Not even the man that owned the house. And I do believe there were more believers in Jerusalem than those that were in that room. And he called unto him his 12 disciples. He gave them power against unclean spirits. You believe there's any unclean spirits today? To cast them out and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. The first is Simon, who's called Peter, and isn't it strange he begins with Peter? This is the book of Matthew. And I have heard men say that the book of Matthew belongs in the Old Testament. I've heard men say that. Because of the Lord's Prayer, or what they call the Lord's Prayer when they said teach us to pray. I've heard men say that Matthew belongs in the Old Testament. And yet, let me remind you that the very first statement in the book of Matthew, notice carefully what it says. The very first statement, and many a scholar today says, I have heard say, that the book of Matthew belongs in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant. And listen to the very first line in the book of Matthew, the book of the generation. That's in the singular. It doesn't say the generation. When it comes to Adam, it'll say the generations of Adam. But when it comes to Christ, it says generation. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And that's what this book is about. This is the only book. In the very first book, Matthew, you find the word church used many times. And you find the government of that church set in this book of Matthew. So this book of Matthew is important. And so he names the 12, and he gives a name. And he said the first, Simon, who's called Peter. I don't know why he named him in this manner. I looked through books yesterday, and some vary a little, but not much. And Andrew, his brother. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. James was beheaded by Herod. Philip and Bartholomew. Bartholomew was probably Nathaniel. If you remember John 1:48, he said, behold, an Israelite in whom is no guile. It probably was Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew, the publican. James, the son of Alphaeus. And Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus. Simon the Canaanite. And notice who's listed last. Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. Who's first? Peter. And it was to Peter who said, whom do men say that I am? He said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, flesh and blood hath not revealed this unto thee. My Father which is in heaven, he said, and upon this rock I will build my church. And prior to that, Jesus had said, all power is given me both in heaven and in earth. And that was after his resurrection. Who do men say that I am? Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. I want to say, there's more to this believing in Jesus than what the world makes of it today. And those who believe in Jesus Christ, they must believe, and that we sang in that hymn number 1, that his throne has eternally stood. They must also believe that Jesus was before the foundation of the world. They must believe that that was Jesus manifest in the flesh. And they must believe that he exists now as a king in glory. Believing in Jesus. He always was. And let me add, his people always were also. When he was set up as head, as a mediator over his church, his people were set up at the same time. God's people are an eternal people. We didn't just, when we were what the world calls saved, we just didn't begin. And I heard a man say last night, I was just for a moment just flipping through the channels, and a man over in Iceland just said, he said, no, I'm sorry. A man out in Ohio, out of Ron Pedro said, and he said, that night I walked in the center and I heard the glorious gospel preached. And he said, God spoke to me, and he said he wrote my name in the book of life. And I said, my friend, many times you'll hear me say, I hope I'm not deceived. But God didn't write his name in the book of life that night. Those names are written in the book of life long ere this world was. Long before Mars, that the scientists are now discovering ever was. The names were in the book of life. Long before the sun was there, the names were in the book of life. And so Judas Iscariot is listed last. I've heard men say that Judas Iscariot was saved. I've heard men say that. But Jesus said, have not I chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil. And Judas Iscariot was that one. These 12, Jesus sent forth. Now when I say these 12 disciples and I went to the church, you get the point? It is Christ sending them forth. And he commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. He told them where they should go. He didn't tell them to cover the whole world. He didn't tell them to pass out tracts, knock on every door and pass out tracts. He didn't do that. He didn't tell them to just go wherever you want to go. He told them exactly where to go. He said, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. That doesn't mean the Gentiles are not going to be saved, but mean at all. But we find out a couple of chapters prior to this, the Lord did two things. In the 8th chapter of Matthew, he touched a leper. Oh, the Jews were upset. He touched a leper. It was against the law to touch a leper, and he touched a leper, and the Jews were upset. Christ laid his hands on a leper. I'm thankful that Christ can lay his hands on sinners, aren't you? If he did not lay his hands on sinners, we wouldn't be saved. None of us. And then on, in that same chapter of Matthew 8, there's a Gentile there. And Christ said, I've not seen such a great faith in Israel. So in Matthew 8, the Lord broke two laws right there. The Jews were upset. But here he said to these 12, he said, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. So he told them where to go. He not only called them, but it says when he called them that he ordained them. I believe it's Luke 6:12. It says he ordained them, and he sent them forth, and he told them where to go. He said, but go rather to the lost sheep. Go to who? Go to the lost sheep. Who are they going to go to? How are they going to know, Ken? As we get into this, we'll find out. Who did he say to go to? He said, go to the lost sheep. Were there already sheep? Did he say go to the goats? He said go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The house of Israel still exists today. Some call it old school Baptist, some call it primitive, some call it particular. But the house of Israel still exists. And maybe I'll bring a verse on that in a minute. But he said, go rather to the lost sheep. And brethren, let me say, when a preacher goes forth to preach, that's all he'll ever preach to are sheep. And only then, at the time that God appoints, will they hear of the house of Israel. So he told them where to go, and he told them to whom they were to preach. And then he told them the message that he wanted them to preach as they went forth. He said, and as you go preach, he said, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Many say today that the kingdom isn't here yet. Were they going to preach something that didn't exist? Were they going to preach something that wasn't here yet? Jesus is the kingdom. He is the king. And he is the kingdom. He said, for thou art the kingdom. What do you mean when he said to Nicodemus, you must be born again in order to enter and see the kingdom? What do you mean? What do you mean when he said, I appoint you a kingdom? What did he mean? What do you mean when he said the kingdom is righteousness and joy and peace in the Holy Ghost? What did he say? What did he mean when he said, my peace give I unto you? He said, not as the world gives. Now they talk peace up there all the time. Up there around the world, they talk peace all the time. They've been trying to get peace in Bosnia for the last, I don't know how many years. They don't have it yet. There's only one true peace. Jesus said, my peace. And that peace was made by his shed blood on the cross. And let me say, well, more of that later. He said, now as you go preach, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And some saying, well, I'm waiting for the kingdom. That's a frightening statement, Mike. I'm waiting for the kingdom. I may not be sure at all times if I'm saved or not, but there's one thing I don't want. I don't want somebody telling me that I'm not saved. I don't want them to tell me that, kid. Because there's one thing that I believe that beats eternal in the hope in the heart of every child of God, and that's a hope of eternal glory. That hope is always there. And I know that by experience. Sometimes your faith is weak. Jesus turned to those in the boat that night and he said, don't you have any faith? Their faith was weak. They thought they were going to drown, be destroyed. They had no faith. Faith will do this, but not hope. For it says you're saved by hope. And that hope is Christ. And he's eternal. And that hope will still be there. Now abideth these three, faith, hope, and charity. But the greatest is charity. And there's a day coming when faith will no longer be needed and hope will no longer be needed, but charity will still exist. And the reason that charity is the greatest is because it's the oldest. It's as old as God. And that's what saves us. It's the love of God. That's what these things mean. He said, you preach the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And that's what we preach today. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. And if there's a kingdom, I'll tell you now, there's a king. There can't be a kingdom without a king. Can't be. Can't be. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. He said, freely you have received. What did he say? Freely you have received, freely give. Verse 9, he said, and I'd like to hear an Armenian missionary preach this. Provide neither gold nor silver nor brass in your purses, nor scrip for your journey, neither 2 coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves, for the workman is worthy of his meat. I'd like to hear a missionary preach that, Ken. That's not the only place that it's mentioned. There are several other places that's mentioned. How do they go today? We send them millions of dollars. Paul said in the book of Romans, chapter 15, and verse 31, listen what he said. Strange verse for a preacher to say. Paul said in Romans 15:31, that I may be delivered from them that do not believe in Judea. That I may be delivered from them that do not believe in Judea. Strange language, isn't it? Language contrary to what we hear in today's world. Isn't it? And what my service which I have for Jerusalem. Which Jerusalem? That one that he said that your house is left unto you desolate? That one that he said that when they said, look at this temple and how beautiful it is. And he said, you know, one day, he said, every stone here is going to be blunt down and turned over. Micah said Jerusalem is going to be like a plowed field. And Paul said the service which I have for Jerusalem may be accepted of the saints. Which Jerusalem was that? When John said in Revelation 21, he said, I saw New Jerusalem. He said, New Jerusalem. Why New Jerusalem? Coming down from God out of heaven. That's the kingdom of God. That's the house of Israel. Paul said, that I may be delivered from them that do not believe. Isn't that a strange statement? Who do we have problems with in our lives, personal lives? We have problems with those who do not believe. That's who we have problems with. Now we have problems with our own flesh and our own depravity. But we have external problems with those who do not believe. When I said a minute ago, those that believe in Jesus must believe he always was. In John 8:24, Jesus said, if you believe not that I am, that means he always was. Teresa, that's what it means. Because he said in Exodus, when Moses went down, he said, who am I going to tell the Pharaoh that sent me? He said, what am I going to say? He said, you say, the I am has sent you. And I am is present tense. I always have been. Pharaoh will know. And Jesus said in John 8:24, if you believe not that I am he, and he there's in italics, it was inserted. If you believe not that I am, a true believer in Jesus Christ believes that he always was and always will be. And a true believer in Jesus Christ believes that he was attached to Jesus Christ. Always has and always will be. There's other verses. I'll not take time. But he said, take neither gold nor silver nor brass in your purse. And what do they say today, Ken? They say if you don't raise us $2,000 a month, we can't go. That's what they say, Mike. We got to have money. We got to have a car. We got to have a motorcycle. We got to have an airplane. We got to get the gospel to them, for if we don't, they'll die in their sins. No, they won't. No, they won't. And Christ went on a tree and shed his blood for that elect people. And they weren't just in Israel, they were all over this world. Every one of them will be there. at the roll call. And they will have heard the gospel. It may not be the audible voice of a man, preacher. But there's another preacher. Isaiah said, he shall be cut off. And who shall declare his generation? Matthew 1 said the generation of Jesus Christ. Who shall declare his generation? Jesus said, these words that I speak unto you. Their spirit and their life. The man said, I heard the glorious gospel of my salvation. He didn't hear it unless Jesus spoke to him first. And some are beginning to admit that today. About time. I'd like to hear, this verse is in other places, this verse here. And into whatsoever city or town you shall enter, inquire who's worthy. I want to show you another verse. Look at Luke chapter 10. Same verse. Look at verse 5. Well, let me just look at verse 4. He says, carry neither purse, nor scrip, nor shoes, and salute no man by the way. Same thing. Luke 10, verse 4, verse 5. And into whatsoever house you enter, first say, peace be to this house. Now watch. And if the Son of Peace be there, they didn't bring him, did he? He said, if the Son of Peace be there, your peace shall rest upon it. If not, it shall turn to you again. I believe somebody already visited that house before they got there, don't you, Ken? Huh? That's what makes you a hardship. I'm glad it does. And verse 7 says, in the same house remain, eating and drinking such things as they give, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. Go not from house to house. A lot of people say, I believe the Bible. I believe the Bible. We only believe what the Lord shows us. And if the house be worthy, in verse 13, let your peace be upon it, but if it not be worthy, let your peace return to you. Whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. You know what that means? That means you're done with them. Don't go back. It means leave them alone. Leave them alone. I was telling him this week, there's a verse that says, mark them which cause divisions among you and avoid them. Avoid them. And you know what? By avoiding them, if they're really a child of God, if they're really truly a child of God, and been saved by His regenerating grace, and if you avoid them and you're a child of God, 1 John says the one proof that we are saved is that we love one another. And your avoiding of them sends a message to them. And if they love you, it'll change. but it'll be in God's time. Verily I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Lady sat down once, not too long, a year or two ago, and got right in front of me and crossed those arms like that and looked me right in the eye and gritted her teeth. And I thought, well, I let you by once, but not this time. You're going to get an answer. And I've just covered some of the things that she questioned. Verily I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Now he begins to tell them about their mission. He said, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Paul was of the tribe of Benjamin. You know what Benjamin means? It means a raving wolf. But then what Paul was doing before he was saved, he was devouring sheep. He said, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. He said, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Now watch what he says. But beware of men. Beware of men. Over in Acts 15, when those men were coming and they were preaching circumcision, it says certain men came preaching circumcision. But beware of men. I wonder about sometimes those that carry that title of reverend, for I expect that most of them were reverends. I expect. He said, beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils. Now many say, well, this is in the days yet to come. They say this is when Christ sets up his kingdom and when the temple is rebuilt and all that. They will deliver you up to councils. Don't you think they have councils today? They had a council one time in the High Baptist Association to go visit a preacher because he wasn't preaching the truth. They had a council. They held a council in Alabama against Brother Poole many years ago because he believed in unlimited predestination. They had a council. Beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils, and he was delivered up to a council. I've seen those councils. That council visited me one time and said, we're going to shut this church down. That's what he's talking about. And they will scourge you in their synagogues. Let me read you their synagogues. Turn to Revelation 2:9. Let me read you their synagogues. Revelation 2:9 says, I know thy works, and tribulation, and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not. They are the synagogue of Satan. You think we don't have any synagogues with us today? Brethren, it's either a church or it's a synagogue of Satan. There's no gray area in there. It's either one or the other. These are the words of our Lord Jesus. These are the words of our Lord. Yeah, I believe Jesus. Jesus loves everybody, they say. Don't sound like it, does it? Let's go ahead. And you shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, Paul was, for testimony against them the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, and here he gives them some comfort, take no thought how or what you shall speak, for it shall be given you in that same hour what you shall speak. And whoever made a better witness than Paul did when he stood before the king. He said, O king, he said it was midday and I saw a light, greater than the light of the sun, and I heard a voice. That king sat there and looked at him and he said, Paul, much learning has made thee mad. He couldn't defend against what Paul was saying. Before, when he called Paul, he said, thou shalt stand before kings for my name's sake. And he was equipped to do it. And they couldn't debate him. They couldn't handle little Randall. He wouldn't have been afraid of him. Scared Jacob many times because of Esau, yet there come a time when he walked in before the king of Egypt, the most powerful man in the world. You don't dare say I'm a shepherd down in Egypt, because sheep pull the grass up. He looked at the king and he said, I'm a shepherd. He wasn't afraid of the king because Jacob knew the real king. And he knew that king's heart was in the hand of that king up there. Jacob wasn't afraid. Watch verse 20. For it is not ye that speak. You want to see the two people? You want to see the old and new man? It is not ye that speak, but the Spirit of your Father which speaks in you. Not you. Paul said, I'm crucified with Christ, yet I live. That is in the flesh, yet not I. Yet not I. And the brother shall deliver up the brother to death, and the father the child. The children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. Has that ever happened? And this will be self-explanatory in just a minute. That's happened. And you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. And that's what happened. You shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. You remember one thing. Predestination and Christ go hand in hand. Don't you forget that. Don't you forget that. Just because you've known somebody 30 years don't make any difference to them. You don't know their heart. Although this man said the other day, he said, yes, I know their heart, but he had a right to say it because I believe he does. He said, no. He don't, but in what he was saying, he knew he was right in what he was saying. But he that endureth to the end shall be saved. Some don't endure, do they? Some can't take it, can they? Some can't take it. When they bring predestination down too close, some can't take it. When they bring it down to the gnat on the wall, that's pretty close. He told him one day, he said, even the shirt you wear, one of his boys can't take it. But nevertheless, Ken, it stands as a testimony. And if you leave this world before they do, and by age-wise, I'll probably leave before you do, but whoever it is, John's younger, Mike's younger, there's one thing I wanted to say. He believed in predestination of all things. And that says it all. Okay? There's comfort for you in that verse. But when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another, for verily I say unto you, you shall not have run over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come, until he meet with you again. The disciple is not above his master, nor the servant above his Lord. It is enough for the disciple that he be as his master and the servant as his Lord. If they call the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more shall they call them of this household? And Beelzebub means son of the devil. How much more shall they call you the same thing? Not therefore, for there is nothing covered. There is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. I believe there's some things covered today in a lot of places, but it's going to be revealed. And you know, the gospel already has revealed a lot of it. The gospel reveals that. And when they reject the gospel, kid, it's because something's covered. That's how they reject the gospel. That's how no more righteous he is. Something about that. But I tell you what I was not speaking to you already, but you heard the ear. What you hear is in the ears. You're not able to kill the body, or you're not able to kill the soul. But the blood of the Lamb was delivered to destroy the soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? They would take these sparrows that were treasured. They ate them. They would take these little sparrows, they would pluck the feathers, and they would roast them, and they would eat the breast. It was a delicacy. But they would sell you 2 for 1 farthing. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall to the ground without your Father. Now wait a minute. Like I said last Sunday, you don't have to have Romans 8, Isaiah 46, Ephesians 1, Lamentations 3, Amos 4, Job 26, Psalm 76, Isaiah 5. You don't have to have those chapters to find predestination. You don't have to say predestinate. He said if a sparrow falls, he knows about it. He fixed it, determined it, predestinated it. You don't have to have the word. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. They're numbered. The very hairs of your head are numbered. They are numbered. The hairs of your head are numbered. The Lord knows how many there are. The hairs of your head. The Lord knows that. He knows how many hairs are in your head. Have you ever tried to count? The very hairs of your head are numbered. Here's people say, I believe in Jesus. Do they? The very hairs of your head are numbered. He said, fear ye not, therefore you're of more value than many sparrows. He said, if I see the sparrow and the hairs of your head are numbered, he said, don't you fear. He said, you're of a lot more value than that sparrow. There's comfort in that. Whosoever therefore shall confess me before men, him will I confess also before the Father which is in heaven. Whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I deny, also deny before the Father which is in heaven. Now stay listening to verse 34. Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. You know, the post-tribbers preach that the gospel is going to be preached in all the world. There's going to be a great revival, and before the end comes, all men are practically going to be saved. You know, it's what the post-tribbers say. Pre-tribbers get up and say, revival's coming. Remember what the Bible says. Paul said in the last days, perilous times shall come. And the last days began when Jesus Christ died on that cross. This is the last days we're living in. And you don't have to be too blind to look around and see that. But he said, think not that I'm come to send peace on earth. What? You mean he didn't come to bring peace on earth? He said, I came not to send peace, but a sword. Faith creates division. True faith will create division. Over in Luke it said that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. Faith creates division. It always has and it always will. I met a lady that worked with me for a while. She left and went to another place, thank the Lord. I met her about a year later and she said, well, I see, he said, we're still serving the same Lord. I said, well, no, we're not. Just let it go with that. No, we're not. Because I never had a minute's peace with her. Jesus said, think not that I come to send peace on earth. And what do men talk about all the time? We want peace. That's all they talk about. Peace. How are we going to get peace? Give us money to educate our children and we'll put them in schools and give us money to do this and money to do that and money to do that and we'll have a wonderful world. Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Pretty plain, Brother Ken. Ain't it? I'm come to set at variance against his father, and his daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be there of his own household. You think the Lord knew what he was talking about? You know. You know. That own household could be your own body too. That could go just a little bit further than just your family. This is the house. I have some other verses marked here. I've not read any of them. Here's the greatest relationship of all. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. If you love your mother, your father, or your son or your daughter more than Christ, you're not worthy of it. And he that taketh not his cross, and here he's referring to his death, he that takes not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. Let me say to you again, there is more doctrine in the death of Christ on the cross than we will ever know in this lifetime. I was noticing yesterday that word astonishment. For a long time I've been wanting to speak in Psalm 60. It said, he has made us to drink the wine of astonishment. And I've been astonished at his doctrines. 2 or 3 months ago I was mentioning Christ and him crucified. Paul said that I might know nothing but Jesus and him crucified. And I thought those words began to hang in my mind. More happened at Calvary than what men today even dream about happening. Or some will say the legal system ended. It did. The legal system ended. It all ended. And we can preach that. But brother, more than that ended. We entered a new era. And it all stopped at Calvary when Jesus brought it to an end. Paul said that I should glory only in the cross of Jesus Christ. For there, he said, I am crucified to the world, and the world is crucified unto me. Let me give you another verse on that. Turn to Galatians chapter 6. I want to point a word out to you. And we begin with verse 12. And as many desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they constrain you to be circumcised, or they constrain you to be saved by their preaching of the gospel, same thing, only lest they should suffer the persecution for the cross of Christ. They don't suffer the persecution of the cross of Christ. Now watch verse 14. But God forbid that I should glory, save in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom the world is crucified unto me, and I unto the world. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creature, a new creation. And that's regeneration. In other words, you say, well, circumcision's not here today. No, it's not. But there are those that are preaching conditions to be saved, and there are those that are preaching conditions after you're saved. And those who preach those conditions is the same thing as circumcision. He said, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but a new creature. And God has put new life into this earthen vessel. We have this treasure in an earthen vessel. And let me say, the treasure is no part of this earthen vessel. The earthen vessel is one thing, and the treasure is another thing. It's there, but they're not the same. Jesus said, when you speak, it's not you that speak. He said, it's the Spirit of your Father that speaks in you. Though the outward man perish, the inward man is renewed day by day. Now watch. And as many as walk, verse 16, as many as walk according to this rule, peace be on them and mercy, and upon the Israel of God. And Paul was writing to the church at Galatians. Do you reckon they understood when he said the Israel of God, that they understood what he was talking about? I expect they did. And he that taketh not his cross, and he was referring to his cross and his death there. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. Just let me give you an example. You can write it beside that verse you want to, Hebrews 11:26. Moses gave up all the riches of Egypt to suffer the reproaches of Christ, for he counted them greater reward than all the riches of Egypt. Moses stood and he had all the riches of Egypt at his hands. He could have been the ruler, the king of Egypt. He said, the reproaches of Christ is a greater reward than being king of Egypt. That's the best way I know how to show that verse. He that findeth his life. If Moses had took the kingship, he'd have found his life. But he didn't. He lost his life. He said, I'd rather be a prophet than be king of Egypt. He that findeth his life shall lose it, but he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. Christ. And Moses said, I don't want to be king, and I'd rather be numbered with these Israelites out here, these slaves. I'd rather be numbered with them. And you know what? I think, how many was it? 6 million come out, 6 million men alone. And David said there was not one feeble person among them. They'd been slaves. There was not one feeble person among them. They wore the same shoes for 40 years. We wear the same shoes now. There was not one feeble person. They didn't drag them out on carts and take their sick, and their physicians go along, and physicians walking along giving them shots and pills and all that like that. There was not one feeble person among them. That's a little bit like the type of the resurrection. What's verse 40? This verse was a lot of comfort to me in 1989 and 90. And it's a lot of comfort to me today. He that receiveth you receiveth me. And he that receiveth me receiveth him that sent me. And when I began to hear the old Baptist preachers preach, I felt I could receive them because I believed what they were saying. What they were saying made sense to me. And I felt in my heart that at last, the way I felt that my experiences were being brought out by them. And I believed what they were saying, and I took comfort in this verse because it says, he that receiveth you receiveth me. And I thought, if I can receive them, then surely I can receive Christ. There's a lot of comfort in that verse. He that receiveth you receiveth me. A man said to me the other day, he said, why do they hate you and improve so much? I said, for the previous question you just asked me. And that's fine with me. Somebody said not long ago, said, how can you be friends with Marvin Dorr? It's fine. It's fine. It's the same with all of us. He that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. He that receiveth a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones. Did he mean the little babies? Well, of course not. One of these little ones. We're all little ones. Listen to what he said. Just give a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple Verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. I didn't match Mark and Luke with what all went on here. It would take me several days. But you'll find parts of this in Mark and Luke. That was what Jesus said when he spoke. That's better words than I can speak. And there's some strong language there. But it's language I hope that you can receive. And it's language that I think in your experience you have found to be true. Let's stand and sing 1054. Expected Jesus born to set thy people free from our fears and envy. Let us find our rest in thee. Israel's strength and consolation, hope of all the saints thou art, dear desire of every nation, joy of every longing heart. Born thy children who deliver, born a child and yet a king, born to reign in us forever. Now thy gracious kingdom bring. By thy holy